Hey, welcome everyone. I just opened the meeting room and let you all in. I'm Gail Rubin, the doyen of death. My company is a good goodbye funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. I'm a certified funeral celebrant and a pioneering death educator. And so happy to have you all joining us on this Reimagine Life, Loss, and Love festival, virtual festival event. I've actually set up several of these, and I would like to remind people that I'm going to keep you muted for the moment, but we will, while we have our conversation with Heather Leigh as part of this, you are welcome to use the chat feature in the bottom of the screen. If you move your cursor, you'll see a little chat button, and that's where you can pose a question while we're still in the middle of Heather and I talking about a day in the life of the business of death. I'd like to introduce to you Heather Leigh. She is the general manager of Greenhaven Memorial Gardens. She is a certified funeral celebrant. She is also a grief recovery specialist. And another new item on her plate is she is a funeral service intern. So she is actually working with funeral homes and learning that business as well. So welcome, Heather. So happy to have you with us. As we say in this business, every day on this side of the sod is a good day.
Definitely, yes. I always like to see this side of the daisies.
Yes. So how did you get involved in the funeral business and why do you do it?
That is a great question. And I will say and give all the credit to my mom. My mom was big into genealogy, and so as a very young child, it was my responsibility to take the freezer paper and the crayons and do all of the face rubbings of all the old monuments. And the joke is that's where I learned my ABCs and my numbers. So that was from a very, very young age. And then my first real job out of school was working at the office of our nonprofit historical cemetery in Washington, Pennsylvania. And I was there for many, many years, knew that place inside, outside, upside down. And that cemetery was started in 1846. And so that was my first real job. And I just absolutely love the industry and love serving our families.
Wonderful, wonderful. So now you have this cemetery in Elgin, South Carolina. We're looking at the entrance behind your shoulder, actually a virtual image of the entrance. And how did you get involved with that cemetery?
I ended up moving to Elgin, South Carolina in the mid 90s and was really disappointed to learn how many funeral homes and cemeteries were actually corporately owned, and really wanted to get back into the industry. And through a series of life events, I ended up returning to school to complete my bachelor's and master's. And just happenstance, I was working at the print shop in Office Depot. And one of the owners of this particular cemetery came in and he asked for copies of this sheet. And when he handed me the sheet, and I'm like, why in the world do you have two burial spaces, two Wilbert Monticellos, and a Matthews Companion Bronze? And what's this on the bottom? I mean, why do you got that on here? He was like, wait a minute, not everybody knows what those products are. How do you know what they are? And so I pulled up Washington Cemetery in Washington, PA, turned the screen around, and he said, could you please come and interview with my business partner? And that was in 2010 and have been here ever since.
Wonderful. Wow. So let's talk a bit about the business of death. I mean, you've got a great scope of experience from cemeteries to following up with people in grief afterwards. So let's talk a little bit about funerals and memorial services or celebrations of life, whatever people want to call them these days. Why should people have a funeral?
That is a really good question, Gail. And what I like to share with individuals is there's no amount of product or service that I or a funeral home can sell that's going to fix this. There's nothing that we can do for this. The heart. That's right. That is actually a process that the individual needs to go through. And while everybody has an opinion about what it should look like, and it being a party, a celebration, a viewing, or whatever they want to call it, it's really important for us to gather at that time and pay homage and honor that individual, because that individual, and this is what I always say, everyone's been loved by somebody somewhere at some time and deserves a dignified burial, whatever that should mean to them. And so that is what I like to do, is find out what can we do to honor this individual, because they were a family person. They were somebody's brother, son, husband, wife, daughter. They were a contributing member of society. Our cemetery honors those individuals through way of having a memory of them and having their components memorialized here. I just learned that one of the individuals, one of the individuals that we had just recently had a service for actually wrote a book on the O-rings that were part of the explosion of the Challenger. I mean, yeah, wow, exactly. I was like, wow, why don't we have a copy of his book in my office so that I can share this with people that come in? You know, this is important. These were contributing members in many different ways. So that service is really important, to bring that and honor that for the family and the community.
Now, this isn't just for burials, though. The cremation rate in this country is shooting up dramatically. And I know in the South, the rates are somewhat lower, but what about cremation?
It's even more important, I think, when it comes to cremation. And a lot of people don't realize that cremation is not a final disposition. Cremation is just an alternative to a traditional burial, and that often is selected whether it's cost effective, environmental concerns, whatever that reason is. That service is for the memory of the individual. It's really not about the physical body. It's about the essence of the person, the spirit of the person, and bringing that to light and honoring that.
Yes. Now, we talked earlier, and you did provide me with some slides, so I'm going to share my screen with the PowerPoint slide about all of the different items that you have to consider when you're looking at a traditional burial. And think about this, that, you know, you can also bury cremated remains. You can also niche them. You can scatter them in a garden. There are a number of options. And actually, you offer some green options at your cemetery, correct?
We do. So I'll take a little bit of time with each option, and I'll first talk about a traditional burial. So a traditional burial is the full body, and I'm going to try to keep this as basic as possible, because we have multiple individuals from all over visiting with us today. So first and foremost is the ground, the plot, the grave. That has to be decided upon. Some cemeteries, such as mine, depending upon where you select in the cemetery, it's going to give you an option of an upright monument or a flat marker. Many cemeteries who are perpetual care, and perpetual care means that we are audited by the state and we have to pay into a reserve a percentage of the money we bring in to ensure the longevity of our cemetery. So unlike church cemeteries, family cemeteries, other cemeteries that are not perpetual care, those are the ones that are going to grow over, dilapidate, and at some point in time be non-existent. So perpetual care.
I've got one of those. I'm the president of historic Fairview Cemetery here in Albuquerque, established in 1881, and it's a big job to keep up a cemetery.
It's huge. It is huge. And like I shared with you earlier, I have 30 acres, and in cemetery years, this is actually a very young cemetery. It was only started in 1992, so I only have 3 acres physically developed for burial. And it is about $10,000 per acre to maintain the grass, the mowing, the trees, all of the monuments or architectural pieces that are there. So it's a lot of work. It's very labor intensive. So when people say, oh, well, I got to go take care of my yard.
Multiply by 30.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about grass, let me tell you. And until you mowed it here. So anyways, the other thing too is the vault, and vaults come in different product styles. So your typical is going to be a polyurethane, a plastic there, and that's your Walmart version, I guess you could say. And then they increase in different types of materials and quality, whether it's concrete, whether it's lined, if it is bronze. So there are various important aspects of the vault, depending upon the cemetery, what's required. The opening and closing is the preparation of the site for the funeral. And then depending upon what type of service or what type of cemetery you're in, you can either have an upright monument, a slant, a flat, bronze on granite, or architectural pieces, which could be something carved. And so there's a lot of options there. And then all of that applies for cremation. However, my cemetery in particular, I have a green space available for scattering, direct placement of cremation in the ground. I also have for traditional burial as well. There are private niche estates, there are columbariums, there are in the ground. You can incorporate them within a bench or in an upright monument or an architectural piece. So there's a lot of options there. And then your mausoleums provide both your niche for interior, exterior for cremation, or the casket would either go in like a couch or long ways, and then it has a plaque or a nameplate for the memorialization part.
And I'd like to point out that when you're talking about funeral arrangements, even if it's burial or cremation, you are dealing with a funeral home to make the arrangements for dealing with the body. But if you are going to have interment in a cemetery, those are separate costs unless the funeral home and the cemetery are what's called a combo.
Correct.
So in the business, you are probably more likely to run into the separate cemetery versus funeral home arrangement. But let's talk about green burial.
Yes, so green burial, in most locations, a green burial is no embalming. If you're going traditional, is no embalming, and that the decedent is either in a shroud, which is some sort of material, or they're in a biodegradable container casket. There's minimal metal involved, and the actual setup is a little different for us, at least. We avoid using as much exterior setup as possible, and we lower directly into the ground. And the same thing with the cremation as well. And with the cremation, we actually can place the remains directly in, or they too can be in a biodegradable urn. There's one that I really like. It's called a salt urn. I don't know if you've seen those. The salt urn is also used for disposition at the sea.
I have a Himalayan salt lamp, and that's what they make the salt urns out of.
Yes,
They're lovely. Yes.
they are. They're gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And they are made to break down over a period of time. So that means that, no metal is really what we're looking for.
And biodegradable. Yeah.
Right, definitely.
Yeah. So when you do a green burial, and are you using people in shrouds, or well, let me back up. Are you doing many green burials? And when you do, is there a casket like a plain pine box or a wicker basket casket or a wool casket? There are all sorts of biodegradable options.
Right. As a matter of fact, when I explain, so my family is actually from Washington, Pennsylvania. That's where my mom is still living. She comes down and spends some time with me. And when she happened to see a willow casket, she's like, oh my gosh, I really like that. And I'm like, well, Mom, we can get that for you. Now she's already prearranged, but when she saw that, it just really spoke to her. And that pays homage to her what she likes to do. She's very much into quilt making. She's very much into handmade products and items that she can make and give us gifts. So this was very much would speak to her instead of having a 20 gauge steel casket.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's very simple in design. Here in the South, we have the seaweed, or I'm sorry, not seaweed, the grass. Yeah, the grass.
Yeah.
And so there are many, many different products and services that are available specifically to service the green industry.
And Sarah Williams pipes up, theoretically, she could be buried in a quilt, assuming that.
Yes, absolutely. Very much so. And it's funny that you say that, because we actually have a quilt picked out to put in the casket with her. And so it's really going to be her. And this is where it comes into, I just want a party, or I just want this, I just want that. Well, isn't this what it is? This is creating that moment that truly represents that individual, instead of something that most or some funeral homes will say, well, you come in, you get X, Y, and Z, that's it. Just like when I took this cemetery over, it had been a corporate cemetery. It was, you get 2 burial spaces, 2 vaults, granite bronze, and 2 openings. That's it. I don't do any of that now. When I took over, it's like out the window. And we do very, very different now than what we would have done back in 2010 when I first started.
Yeah. We will be talking about costs. Hannah Dean had asked about, she was curious about the cost for all of these options. And of course, that is going to vary depending on where you are, your market, and the types of providers that are available. But the National Funeral Directors Association does an annual survey where they price out the costs. And Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's, at least for the funeral part of it, it's at least $7,000, $8,000 at this point.
Easily. So now, and if I could tap in right at this moment, Gail, let's talk a little bit about understanding what it is that you're purchasing. First of all, do your homework. Who owns the funeral home and the cemetery? And that those oftentimes are 2 separate entities. If I have $20,000, I'm going to go buy a vehicle, I'm going to know what color, what kind, where I'm going to get it. I've done my internet research. I've asked around. I've done all of my follow-up work to see who's going to give me the best deal. I am shocked on how many people will not do that when they're doing their final expenses, because this is really important. I think that a couple years ago in the American Cemetery, I think, they did a thing about where the woman was really upset that she spent $10,000 just at the funeral home and didn't know till after her husband was buried that she could have gone across the street and only spent $5,200.
Oh, wow.
I see this all the time. If it says Joe Smith Funeral Home, you better find out if Joe Smith is still there and find out who actually owns, because when a corporate buys that, they are buying that name because they know that that's what the community is accustomed to seeing. Now, on the funeral or on the cemetery side, it's a little bit different. I'm the only locally owned cemetery in this area. All my competitors are either the National Cemetery or corporate cemeteries. And a lot of people will figure that out once they see our price list. And I think across the board, no matter what state it is, all funeral homes and all cemeteries have to have their prices listed. And you have to be able, if you ask for it, you should get it. So we really need to take the opportunity and be educated and ask good questions and make sure that you're okay with that. And if you go in with an insurance check, do not tell anybody how much that insurance check is. Now, Gail, I already tested you on this earlier. If you have a $20,000 life insurance policy, how much is that funeral going to cost you?
And I said $20,000.
And I told you, no, that was the wrong answer. It's going to be $22,500. And
Even
then
more than the policy.
Right. And then the funeral home's going to call me and tell me that, hey, the family doesn't really have any money left over. Can you cut them a break? So they want me to give up my product and my service at a less value, even though they only have that family for a very short period of time. And now they want me to make some sort of consideration. And it's like, no, it just doesn't work that way.
So yes, funerals are a huge consumer issue, and that's both you and I share that passion for getting people to shop around. And Sarah Williams did post a comment about supporting your local Funeral Consumers Alliance too. They are a great resource for educating and advocating for funeral consumer rights and helping people shop around.
Yes.
I'd also like to actually put in a plug for a website called funeralocity.com, which actually helps people do online searches for prices in their markets for funerals, not for the cemeteries. I don't think anything similar exists for cemeteries.
No, there's the cemeteries are unfortunately lagging behind in a lot of areas. The industry as a whole, at least in my particular area, is very old school. It's pretty much still a good old boy system, and I want to tread lightly in that area. It's really challenging to be more proactive and progressive because the families are requesting it. However, the gatekeepers are denying it. And so if you as a family want something, do your work, do your research, ask questions, call around. I ended up serving a family just because I called them back immediately and I said, I will meet you where you are. Now, I had already been home, dressed down, and shoveling in some spaghetti for dinner. And I was like, I will get dressed and I will come right back to my office, because that is how important this is when you go to make those decisions. Even if you don't stay with me, I want you to ask good decisions or ask good questions.
Yes, yes. And also, why don't we talk a little bit about buying and selling burial plots? There's sort of an issue when you talk about, okay, my parents have bought their burial plots and they're saying it's all taken care of. But as we've been discussing, the cemetery is only part of the equation. And sometimes parents may say, oh, it's all taken care of, but it's not, because maybe they just bought the plots, but they didn't pay for the opening and closing and the marker on the cemetery side, plus the funeral arrangements on the funeral home side. But a couple of weeks ago, Heather, could you move a little toward the center of the screen?
Am I falling off the side?
Almost.
Sorry. Slowly inching out.
Yeah, right. Um, so this woman had contacted me saying, I have several burial plots in South Carolina and I want to sell them.
Yeah.
What's the situation when you have burial plots you want to sell?
So there are several different options available. And again, we got to be mindful of the states and everything. So this is exactly what I shared with this individual. There are websites that you can go to and list. It's kind of like the Craigslist of cemetery services, I guess you could say. Again, buyer beware, seller beware if you decide to put this on some sort of list like that. The other thing that I share with individuals, and this is kind of like the secret that nobody shares, is that if you actually own burial spaces and you file a Schedule A on your tax return, you can donate those burial spaces to a 501c3 and get current market value as
Oh,
a donation. Nobody talks about that. And that is something that I try to help our families out with, is either connect them to a 501c3 organization, or I work with, in conjunction with, say, well, I'll share a story with you. Several years ago, remember I told you about the guy that was in the National Guard, and the VA was holding up his burial information, and they couldn't get the service the way they wanted it at a national memorial. I'm sorry, national cemetery. And so what ended up happening, I actually had a gentleman who ended up divorcing. He was a veteran. His ex-wife had sold the burial spaces and moved on to somewhere else. I was able to give that space to that veteran. And that was something that I do here at my cemetery. If you are moving on to some other location, I do everything I can to either resell it, donate it, or provide it to somebody who is in desperate need. And there's a lot there's a lot that has to happen in order for that connection to be a solid connection. It's just not something we do frivolously and just on a whim. There's a lot behind it.
so let's talk a little bit about people's fear of planning ahead. Even though 100% of us die, less than 30% of adults do end of life planning. That's wills and trusts, advanced medical directives, and pre-need funeral planning.
Mm-hmm.
How often do we hear men, and it's always men, say,
Always
"Oh,
men.
just throw me in a ditch"? Why do you think planning rates are so low?
One, and the biggest one that I find is our fear of death. And so there are 7 different reasons that individuals fear death. And one is, my death will cause grief to my relatives and friends. And so my response to that is that there's a memoir called Men We Reaped, and it's by Jasmine Ward, or When Breath Becomes Air by Paul, and the last name is Kalithi. And so it talks about resiliency. And so that's one of the very first ones, is the cause of grief to the family. This is my personal one. All my ambition, plans, and projects would come to an end. And so that's another fear of death. And my response to that is, beyond my flesh and blood, the cemetery is my baby, everything that I do here in the community. So it's really important to have a plan of action, to make sure that I have a succession plan, to make sure that my family is well aware of what my intents and purposes are, to have everything ready and written down. And that is one of the biggest things when we talk about legacy. Write your story for your family to share. And then that book by Jasmine Ward was Men We Reap. I saw that came up on one of the chat. Men We reaped, R-E-A-P-E-D.
Reaped, R-E-A-P-E-D.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll put, I'll do a follow-up email with some of these links that we talk about to you all.
Okay. The other one is, I'm worried the process of death might be painful. And so getting old is not for the weak. Dying is not for the weak. That is a journey. It is a process. The body literally shuts down like a well-oiled machine. It just automatically starts shutting down different components. And that the book and the movie that we talked about earlier, Gail, was Being Mortal, is a great resource for individuals who want to have that conversation, because it talks about the quality versus the quantity. And so what does that look like? The other one is, the fourth one is, I will no longer have any experiences. Well, guess what? You're living right now, right? Go live life. And this is what I tell all my grief recovery people: go live life. Quit not living life. Don't work through the grudges, work through the pain. It's a part of being human, because guess what? We have one showtime. That's it. We're not coming back to do this again.
Well, I mean, there are people who would say, who have had near-death experiences, that can share some pretty interesting insights into maybe this isn't the only life.
Right, absolutely. And I actually would like to live my life now and then find that other part out later.
Yeah.
Let's see. I would no longer be able to care for my dependents is another really big one as well. And there are ways that you can create trust for your dependents. You can leave a financial legacy. You got to do your homework, though, and you've got to have that information written down and see the appropriate advisors for that. Now, going back to what you just said about the afterlife, I'm afraid of what might happen if there is an afterlife.
Oh, heaven.
Oh, you better get one with your spiritual advisor. Is my recommendation on that one. And you need to define, what does afterlife mean to you? What is that? And so oftentimes we have this umbrella statement, and we don't do anything to define exactly what is that? What does that mean? And then I'm afraid of what might happen to my body after I die. Pre-plan.
Yeah.
Pre-plan, okay? So throw my body in the ditch is not a pre-plan. That is an avoidance. That is denial. That is saying, I don't want to talk about it. And I wish I could remember the name of the study, Gail, but there was a study done that individuals who have pre-planned and have all of that stuff taken care of, that our subconscious relax.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we have checked that box off, and we know that we're going to live life to the fullest. We're going to do everything we can. And in the event of my demise, I've done what I can to the best I can. I think there's, what is that statement? Do well, be well. I can't remember the whole thing. Anyways, we've done what we can in the best way that we can. And that is for yourself. That's for your family, for your community. That is so important. So those are the 7 reasons primarily of what, on what holds people up from pre-planning.
Yeah. And in fact, Nancy Walker just asked you to differentiate between pre-planning and pre-paying. And I think at this point, I'm going to pull up that slide that was the not so helpful advertisements.
Oh.
So you can pre-plan and not prepay.
Yes.
And some of you, I mean, you've got information here for South Carolina, but I can tell you I have gotten that exact same benefit information for New Mexico, rather, citizens only. So some company out there is looking to collect your information so they can sell you funeral expense insurance.
Yeah, so that one, And my middle initial is not N. It actually, I don't have a middle initial, and a lot of companies put N for none, I guess. Anyways, it says supplement your government, whatever's I got to move the screen here. Anyways, that particular one, and Gail and I had a conversation about this, is that, when did you say it was, like 1938?
1938, when Social Security was started, they provided a funeral benefit of $255. Why that amount? Because in 1938, that's what a funeral cost, and it hasn't gone up since. So Social Security will still pay $255, but that won't even get you an obituary in most newspapers.
Oh, no, it sure won't. No, that might pay for the gas to get all your research done. That's about it. So I had shared with Gail earlier that I was speaking with somebody from the Social Security Administration, and they had said that that really was to cover those incidentals that may not be covered under some sort of insurance policy or some other savings plan. And it was really to be able to buy a new suit or buy some food or, take care of those incidentals. So there is nothing anywhere that says anyone other than I or me, yourself, is responsible for your end of life planning and cost. GoFundMe pages are not a funeral planning page nor a resource. That I get so upset every time I see that. The other thing too is that you can pre-plan, which is basically writing everything down and seeing either a funeral director or your cemeterian and talking to them about some ideas that you want. So you're gonna, what casket, what shroud, what vault, all of that. And then at a funeral home, you could get an insurance policy to cover that specifically. And that might be a few dollars a month. And this is something to note, at least in the state of South Carolina. I don't know what other states are. A lot of people think that if I plan with ABC Smith Funeral Home, I have to stay with ABC Smith Funeral Home. That plan is an insurance plan that can be moved to any funeral home. You don't have to say that it stays with that particular one. Whereas when you plan and pay at a cemetery, most likely it's going to stay at that cemetery. So it doesn't move around. Now, what I share with my families is, let's say that they came in 1996, they bought 2 burial spaces, 2 vaults, and a granite bronze marker. And now Grandpapa is getting ready to pass away, and he's decided he wants to be cremated. Unless those products have already been purchased, which 9 times out of 10 they're not, we put it into an irrevocable trust fund that we have to submit documents to pull from. I tell my families it is like a Christmas savings account. I don't know what the gifts are that I'm buying. I just know that I have the money and it's already secured. What can I get for this amount of money? So the family will come in and say, well, Grandpapa really wants to be cremated. Okay, well, let me look at these products with you instead of the 2 burial spaces, the 2 vaults, and this. Now, if you still want ground burial, we can do XYZ. If you want something else, we can do ABC. You can prepay with the funeral side. And if there's more money at the end of that policy, when you go to cash it in, the funeral director is required to pay that difference back to the family. And so all your products, all your services are covered. Same thing with the cemetery. However, in the state of South Carolina, we are not making a dime on any of that money that we're putting into a trust fund. It literally is just sitting there. So oftentimes it's at a loss to us. And that's why some of those products and services do not fall under pre-planning or prepaying, because it's a labor cost that may increase in cost over 10 years. So opening and closing is a really good example. I'm not going to sell you an opening and closing, because at some point in time in the future, if it only costs $200 in 1992, my gravedigger is going to charge me $800-900 today. So that's why we don't labor costs. I don't put that money aside because there's no way I can guarantee that.
Right.
So I hope that that was helpful in answering the difference between pre-planning and prepaying.
And Nancy also noted that funeral homes are only one source for caskets and urns, and usually the most expensive. I have a chapter in my book, A Good Goodbye, called I Got It at Costco. And yes, Costco and Walmart online, and there are a number of online resources you can order caskets and urns. I'm on the board of directors of a local nonprofit in Albuquerque called Fathers Building Futures, which gives jobs and skills to previously incarcerated men to help them become better breadwinners for their families. And they make great caskets, and they're very, very, relatively speaking, I mean, they're beautiful, they're kosher, and they're not that expensive. And it's all for caskets for a cause, I like to say.
I like that. I do want to make a couple notes on that. So for an example, in the state of South Carolina, a casket or an urn will not be delivered into the state of South Carolina. So there are some exclusions that if you're going to, if somebody's here in the state of South Carolina, they have to go to North Carolina or Georgia to go pick it up because it is blocked, and that it is a funeral product that has to be sold by a funeral home. Now, I have had that the casket was picked up in North Carolina. Guess what the funeral director did? Charged the individual the cost, AKA transferring. And so they still had some costs associated. So make sure you do your homework. If you go to an independent, and an independent, such as myself, or the funeral home that I'm an apprentice with, we are independents. That means that we're going to do the best that we can to provide the best quality. And I usually share with my families, we got Walmart, we got Target, or we got Macy's. And I'll be happy. Each one of those, it's a good product. There's nothing wrong with it. I am not going to ask you to spend more than you can afford, and we're going to figure out how to make it affordable for you. So have that conversation. There's nothing wrong with having that conversation.
How about at this point, if we open up the microphones, and if you want to verbally ask questions, let's have a conversation. You are able to unmute yourself if you wish to pipe up. And I did see that Nancy had Nancy Walker, you had another question about refunds. Do you want to ask about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Nancy.
You were talking about insurance funded prepaid contracts. And I may have misunderstood you, but I thought you may have said there were circumstances under which at the time of need, the family could actually get a refund if, for example, the original prepaid contract was for a, let's just say a copper casket, which is way up there. But at the time of need, the family says, you know what, we don't even like copper. We want a 20 gauge metal casket, which costs thousands of dollars less. Did I understand you to say that the funeral home would say, oh, that's fine. Here's the 20 gauge copper casket, and here's a refund on the difference?
So if, let's say that when mom and dad pre-planned and prepaid with the insurance policy, and at the time they paid $20,000 in for both of them, so $10,000 per person. And when you go back in and you downgrade some of those products and services, there could be an overage that is due back to the family. Now, there may be circumstances that another cost has increased, and there may be some situations where products and services have to be juggled around to accommodate $10,000. So I have seen both where the products and services originally picked cost $10,000, and when the family's gone in and downgraded them, they've received some money back. And I've also seen where they've had $10,000 in and they've upgraded the package or added additional services, and so they've had to pay the difference in those overage charges. So either or. You're not going to get per se a refund of like an entire $5,000 or $10,000, something to that extreme. There could be a difference in cost and labor and other services that may be more or less than what the original package was selected.
You know, here in Texas, when pre-need salespeople sell these prepaid contracts, the first thing that happens is they have the customer select very specifically what goods and what services they want. Because the prepaid people are saying the reason you should do this and pay for this now is because, quote unquote, you're locking in today's prices. Mm-hmm. And even if the death occurs 20 years from now, we will provide comparable merchandise. If this particular casket that you're picking out today is not available, we will still provide one that's absolutely comparable, even if it's 35% more expensive than it is today. And all that, you know, they get everything nailed down, if you'll pardon the expression. Then they look, it's done. The products and services are selected and very specific. And then the next phase is, how are we going to pay for it? And we have, at least here in Texas, two ways. We have insurance funded, prepaid, and we have the trust ones, like you were talking about, that the money goes into a trust. Mm-hmm. But never, the only thing I have ever heard of in the 10 years that I've been involved with the Funeral Consumer Alliance is upselling. Like, yeah, well, we know that, you know, grandma picked out this very simple pine casket, but come on, think of all those apple pies that she made for you through the years. You don't really want to dishonor her with such a simple thing. Wouldn't you really like this rose velvet interior 18 gauge casket? And then they upsell. But I just have never heard of a funeral home allowing customers to go less expensive and then jostling the goods and services around to still get to the amount of the original insurance policy. So this has been an education.
You made a lot of great comments and a lot of good points there. So it is hopefully where we are able to offer those comparable products at the price that the family has already paid for.
I think on the cemetery side, that's far more believable.
Right. Well, you know, we have to look at, so for an example, somebody who may have purchased a bronze mounted on granite for a memorial back in 1992, bronze is really, really getting really cost expensive. It's just ridiculous. And there's a lot of elements that go along with it that in my area, families are not happy about the bronze at all. So we've gone all granite. And when I've gone all granite, it allows me, for that family who may have actually selected a companion flat bronze on granite, that has now allowed them to go to an upright monument. And they love the fact that they can select that at no additional cost. So there's, you know, comparable, the products and the service. And I've also had where I've had adult children come in and say, hey, we know mom and dad is pre-planned for a traditional burial. I just want to let you know that we're going to have them cremated and we want all of their money back.
Good luck.
Yeah. And I tell them, okay, yeah, I don't know where that's coming from. However, going back to the Christmas savings account, we didn't buy those products and services. We set the money aside And now that you're going to do this, we can do X, Y, and Z with that. We can do private niche estate. We can do a columbarium. We can do ground burial. We can do an upright monument. You know, because something still has to be done with those cremated remains. And so it is, you just really have to do your research and make sure you are very thorough and understand the circumstances.
Well, I think that's the point, is that if people are going to start putting money out on some future arrangements, they really need to ask a lot of very specific questions.
Absolutely.
Before I became involved with the FCA, I purchased a pre-need contract for a cremation. This was like 20 years ago. It was $1,000. And then after I became involved with FCA and found out about what we call down here the body ranch, where you can donate your body for forensics research, I realized I didn't need that. And you know what? The insurance company not only gave me a refund, but gave me the interest that the $1,000 had earned in the meantime. But I figured I was lucky with that. That may not always work out so nicely.
You really were. So I do want to caution our listeners for a couple things. One, there are companies, and the ones that slide that Gail had put up with all of the stuff that you're going to get in the mail, that are selling funeral insurance. Please do not go through them. That one slide, on that slide, it had the products listed on the left-hand side: the urn, the vault, and the granite. I was involved in a situation with a family out in California, and I told them that they had to buy the monument through me, and I wouldn't accept one through the internet, and I wouldn't accept one through a funeral insurance provider either, because you really don't know what you're going to get. I have seen where the vault is plastic. I have seen where the monument or the slant is basically a foam core or a styrofoam core with only a 1/2 inch of granite glued around it. And that's what's being sold. So somebody's thinking they're getting a solid granite or a concrete vault. They're not. So you have to just stay away from those insurances. Yeah, that list on that left-hand side there. Just stay away from that. And also, one thing I share with my families too, especially adult children, when they lose a parent, be aware of what mom and dad are watching on TV, because, you know, especially for us women, we see Tom Selleck, you know, oh, he was that hot PI. He had all of this, you know, he was just so wonderful. I know he would never lie to me. So I need to call this 800 number and get this insurance because Tom's looking out for my best interest.
This ain't my first rodeo, you know.
Right. Or Alec Trebek. Love Alec Trebek. However, you know, come on, let's be aware, because here's what our parents are thinking about. Oh my God, it was so expensive to bury my spouse. I have medicine. I have, you know, all those medical issues. They're concerned, and now they are in this funk because they're alone. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. The kids have their own issues they're dealing with in their own life, and so just be really aware of what is being watched and listened to when it comes to our elders and when it comes to this type of stuff we're getting in the mail. It's just so incredibly dangerous.
Did you actually talk to the Colonial Penn life insurance company?
Did you see my writing down there?
See your handwriting on the card.
Yes, I actually, and Gail, I don't know if you remember this, I actually teach death and dying at Columbia College. And so this is one of the things I talk about: scams and ripoffs. And so you see down there, payments plus 7%. So if you get this product, you better live for the next 2 years, because you're not going to get anything out of anything you put into if you should die within the first 2 years. And then after that, there was, if you die from anything other than natural causes, then there's no payout. And so, yeah, I'd have to pull out my old homework to look at that and what I assigned to the students. But yeah, just say no.
And the $9.95 a month per unit, that's like per $1,000 of coverage, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
I put a little plug in the chat for payable on death accounts.
Yes, you can, you know, just like your Christmas club, you can save it up, and then a payable on death account will pay to the beneficiary who should take that money and pay for your funeral. Let's just hope they don't take the money and go to Mexico.
Right.
Yeah. So I did want to.
I think Sarah had a question. Can we squeeze Sarah in?
Sure.
Thanks, Heather.
Hey, Miss Sarah.
Guess who just moved to Elgin, South Carolina?
Who?
My daughter-in-law
And what
my
is your
husband. Now, what are the odds? What are the odds that anybody's even really ever heard of Elgin, South Carolina? No offense, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell my husband, we got to get down there, road trip. She'll think I really want to come see them in their brand new house, but I want to come see
me.
Greenhaven. Yeah, I mean, this is so cool. Okay.
And Miss Sarah, I want to note, I love the skull on your bed.
Oh, there's 3 of them. They're pillows.
I saw that. I love it.
I'm trying to keep up with Gail Rubin. Good luck, right?
Good luck.
Okay, so I'm up here in North Carolina, really not that far from you. I'm near Chapel Hill.
Oh yeah, okay.
And one of the things you said, and it may be a South Carolina law. I just want to be sure, because I don't want to misinterpret anything. If I live in Elgin and I go to the IKEA, let's pretend there's an IKEA in Columbia. You're not gonna let me, I thought, well, it's a funeral home. Maybe the cemetery doesn't necessarily, the funeral home has to accept anything I bring them, but you don't, because you're a cemetery. Is that okay? So I don't have to go to North Carolina. If there was a casket thing and a casket wholesaler in South Carolina, I can take it to the funeral home. I just can't bring it to you.
So what it is that if my mom lived here and she tried to order that willow casket, it would not deliver here. So the manufacturers know that they're not allowed to deliver to the state of South Carolina.
Wait, but the state of South Carolina cemeteries?
No, to me as an individual. Now they'll go to a funeral home. It'll go to you can okay. You and I as a consumer cannot order a product direct and have it shipped to my house or your house and then take it to a funeral home. Now, if you go to a funeral home and you say, hey, this casket right here is what I want, they'll order it for you and it can be shipped to the funeral home.
Oh, honey, that's not the funeral rule of 1984. That funeral home by law has to accept anything I bring to them, even if it's a box.
Yeah, definitely. That they do. What I'm saying is you and I as a consumer cannot have a product shipped directly to your home. That they won't deliver in the state of South Carolina. You would have to have, so let's say that you lived here or your daughter lives here, okay? And your daughter wants a gold casket or Cinderella casket.
Daughter-in-law.
Okay. So your daughter-in-law has ordered a Cinderella casket. They exist. It will not ship to her house. it could ship to your place in North Carolina because they don't care in North Carolina.
Okay, so it is a specific South Carolina law for some
Yeah.
reason.
Now
Okay.
she can order it. She can order it and have it shipped directly to the funeral home.
Okay. Okay, got it.
I as a consumer cannot have it shipped to me. I can ship it to a funeral home.
And they can't, and the funeral home cannot charge a handling fee. That's the funeral rule too.
Yeah, they're going to pad it somewhere, Miss Sarah.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. But this has just been fascinating to me.
And in fact, we will be having other conversations along these lines, both for Reimagine and for my upcoming Before I Die New Mexico virtual festival, which
Yeah.
will be coming up October 30th to November 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
So you may not know October 30th is Create a Great Funeral Day, and then November 2nd is All Souls Day. So then we have Halloween and All Saints Day, All Souls Day, and we are lining up 4 full days of great conversations. And Heather is going to be on again on the first day. We have a panel discussion called "Where the Bodies Are Buried," and we'll be talking with at least 4 or 5 cemeterians who are doing great things with their cemeteries to connect with their communities and to also provide great services with the folks who need them, including pet cemeteries, green burial, great events in the cemeteries. So look for a link, and in fact, I'll keep you apprised as we go. And I did want to put a mention in that Heather is one of our first cemeteries to be a certified provider of something called AFTR. And this is a very exciting new development. It was just introduced to the public at the end of July, beginning of August. Heather, why don't you talk about it?
After is so incredible. And actually what happened, I have a situation where a gentleman had died unexpectedly and has children around United States. And so there's a little bit of difficulty between the kids and whatnot. And so After provides this camera that can be mounted from an upright monument or at the foot of a grave if it's a flat one, and it allows individuals to check in on that burial space. And so it's a great opportunity for families who are outside of the burial area, and they are able to leave a online diary. They're able to take pictures. They're able to share information. It's a digital diary, basically, that has real-time capacity to check in on the burial space. This is really important for this particular individual because of the lack of communication between the kids, or somebody thinks that somebody's taken something, and yeah, it's a great opportunity for them to be able to have that connection despite not being here. And it's helpful for me because then I don't have to go and say, yes, I did put the flowers out. Yes, I did do this. Yes, I did do that. So it kind of takes me out of the equation now. And I'm so incredibly thankful for that, because she can see what it looks like. The cost, Miss Sarah, for the After, is that what you're asking, dear?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I believe it's like $499. And the big question I do have from that most people have asked is, well, what happens if somebody steals it? The thing of it is, this product is useless outside of its location. Once the admin setup is done, the product is absolutely useless and has no value. And so we're able to take care of small replacements and stuff like that in the event that it should happen. I don't foresee anybody doing anything like that.
And the neat thing is, so the camera in the cemetery is connected to an app on your smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you check in, and you can talk to your loved one, and there's a very low volume speaker that, so, prayers or whispered whispers of the heart can be spoken directly to the deceased. So it's a really interesting way of using our new technology, both the camera and the smartphone app, to help people stay connected to their loved ones in the cemetery.
Is the camera solar powered?
It
Yeah.
is. And so there is a battery that's incorporated with it. And I think the battery, it's like a 5-year battery, something to that effect. It's all solar powered. It's all connected together. There's nothing, and for me, my biggest concern was maintenance and my maintenance team and having to mow and trim around it. And it actually is not going to be that bad at all. So it's no worse than mowing or trimming around a solar light.
Cool.
So it's sort of like a baby monitor at the other end of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Except for you get to have the diary, which I think is really important. And the diary allows people to share memories and share stories in a space that is not going to be disrupted or hacked or tampered with by outside forces.
And in fact, I'm typing in the link to their website into the chat, so you can go visit after.live and learn more about it. There's 2 different levels of the monitoring is a monthly subscription. So
Very inexpensive.
yeah, and you can learn about that there. Hey, we have run overtime. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Heather. It's been so great to visit with you, and thank you all for coming and being on this call. And we have recorded it, so I will be making a YouTube video out of this, and so you can come and revisit the information. But I will also do a follow-up email with links to the books that we talked about and resources. I do have a 50-point executor's checklist from my latest book, Kicking the Bucket List, 100 Downsizing and Organizing Things to Do Before You Die. Well, this 50-point checklist helps you realize just how much you actually have to get done for planning ahead for end-of-life issues. So feel free to go to my website at goodgoodbye.com to find those resources. And again, thank you to Heather, and look forward to joining you on other Reimagine and Before I Die New Mexico virtual festival events.
Thank you, everybody.